Welcome to the Winged Wheel Podcast. Here to talk all things hockey are your hosts, Brad Crisco, Ryan Hanna, and Evan Lobsinger.
Was Austin Matthews the problem all along?
Oh, absolutely. They looked better. They looked stronger than Boston that game than they did all series. Look, Marner played better. Maybe the pursuit of 70 was the mistake that Toronto was making.
Never put a 69 goal scorer on your team. That's really what the lesson is here.
And that's why Red Wings fans feel mostly good about their season, is they weren't, burdened by a 69 goal scorer. They would never if you can't reach 70 goals, they would never put a guy who could not reach that plateau on the team. They wouldn't even bother.
Don't even bother with 40. There's no point even sniffing or having the idea in your brain.
You don't need goals in the playoffs. You need grit and determination.
Colorado won with a lot of goals.
Through grit and determination. No skill whatsoever.
It's funny being at this point in the season now compared to having done it all year in previous years. It's I have so much time to catch up on how prospects are doing, making, snarky, joking remarks about, if the Red Wings were in play right now. We didn't use up all that content before, so I feel good about the terrible jokes at this point.
And it's all we have.
It's all we have. No, there actually is quite a bit of, we're going to get into the prospect talk, and that's really good. But good on the Eastern Conference playoff teams for just proving that they were all just as bad as the Red Wings. Detroit going in there, would it have changed anything? Very minimally in either direction. It would have been altogether the same result. And it's just nice to say, wow, you all suck just the same as us who are out. And you joined us, a week and a half later?
You know what the underrated part of being a fan of a team that doesn't make the playoffs is? You can just spend the whole playoffs being a hater.
That's professional haterism. It's good for the soul.
It's genuinely fun.
It's what Evan was born on.
I would say the Red Wings would still have been much more interesting for not only us, but the league than Washington.
It's the perfect mentality to have to be a hater in this situation.
That's right. We're not going to be better, but we're at least not going to be boring schmucks like you.
Exactly.
Yeah, awful performance.
We're going to get into that, though. All right, let's get into it. Welcome to the Winged Wheel Podcast, here to talk to you about all things Detroit Red Wings hockey, the world of the NHL, and lots more. I'm one of your hosts, Ryan Hanna.
I'm Brad Crisco.
And I'm Evan.
On this episode of the Winged Wheel Podcast, we are going to be talking to you about a couple of Red Wings prospects who have been making noise all year and really since they've been drafted. But we're going to start the conversation of what's their next step and what could they do next season for the Red Wings, overseas, for the Grand Rapids Griffins. What's likely to happen here as Yzerman and Lalonde consider their prospect pool. We're then going to get right into the playoffs because I think quite a bit has happened. We're going to be those selfish haters where we're going to tie in Detroit in narratives that don't actually exist, but it's fun and it's good for the soul, as Brad mentioned. But we're also going to be covering updates from across the playoffs. And then we're going to jump back to prospects and do this episode's 2024 NHL Draft Prospect Profile, one that will likely not be, a target for Detroit based on where he's going to go, but there could be some unique situations where he could be relevant for Detroit. And if you're subscribing to the chaos Brad theory that he brought up last episode, this would be a great chaos play to make for this talented of a player. And then we'll get into some more NHL news before overtime. Before all that, I want to let you know that this podcast is primarily supported by our Patreon supporters, patreon.com/wingedwheelpodcast. If you want to join the so-called Dub Club, you get access to some really great benefits like our overtime bonus episodes, which record right after these main ones. And Evan sometimes drops monumental hockey news scoops, which we're now in the process of verifying. We had to blank some parts out, so the patrons are going to tear you apart for that one.
Okay.
You also get access to our Patreon exclusive Discord, where you can join in the tearing apart of one Evan Lobsinger, and you're also automatically entered into all of our giveaways. For example, we gave away 2 tickets to every Red Wings home game last season. So again, patreon.com/wingedwheelpodcast if you want to be eligible for those tickets or other similar prizes in the future, jersey giveaways, what have you, the Discord and the bonus episodes and lots more. This show runs because of our Patreon supporters, so we can't thank them enough. Let's jump into the topic of 2 players for the Red Wings, both from the same draft class, 2 guys that we were really excited about, from the moment of being drafted, but since seeing them develop after being picked in their respective leagues. Nate Danielson and Axel Sandin Pellikka have made a lot of noise. We saw, Nate Danielson almost make the team at a camp last year, and we saw Axel Sandin Pellikka push records in the SHL and show his talent as that right-handed talented defenseman with Skelleftea in Sweden. So there's a lot of promise there, and we are getting to the point now where we're going to see what translates. So let's start with Nate Danielson. What's he been doing in the WHL since he's been traded to the Portland Winterhawks, their playoff run, and then we'll get into, could he be a Detroit Red Wing next season?
Basically everything everybody wanted is what he's been doing. The dichotomy between Portland and Brandon is fun. We were looking at the stats before we started recording. He played roughly the same amount of games between Brandon and Portland in the regular season. I think he played 2 more with Portland. I want to say it was 26 and 28. He scored the same amount of goals for both teams in each half of the season, but his assists in Portland doubled over roughly the same amount of time, proving that if, in fact, he has more quality line mates, the offense is there. And then he joined the very strong team in Portland to go on a playoff run, which they are in the midst of. And if you're wondering, would he be a passenger? Would he be a driver? Would he be a complimentary piece? Well, he leads the team in scoring. And they've been a wagon in these playoffs so far. So almost quite literally, we could not have asked for more out of Danielson in what is likely to be his final WHL season.
If you remember his draft profile, he's going to either Grand Rapids or Detroit next season. That's going to happen. Yeah,
he's not going back for his OA year. There's no way.
If you remember his draft profile, it was all the things that he does 2 ways, the character, which I know people might be sick of hearing it, but he really seems to be a standout guy. They love him. They loved him in Brandon. They love him in Portland. He's making a big difference in that room. And it was the question of what kind of offense can a guy bring that, at the level where he was picked, a lot of people said, well, if you watch his games, I remember we talked to Chris Draper and he said, if you watch his games, there's so many plays where his teammates just couldn't come through for him, but he set up a fantastic play. But if you don't see that kind of production on the score sheet, it does make you a bit nervous. And you're exactly right, Brad. What we've seen from Nate Danielson so far, even after the strong camp he had with Detroit in that preseason, what we've seen from him since, and then since going to Portland, he's answered a lot of questions. And to me, I don't really have concerns on that front anymore. His year combined so far has been everything that could have realistically been asked of Nate Danielson. I think he could be that, top 6 center for Detroit. I think his offensive abilities are there. We've seen his playmaking abilities. Go look at some of the goals that he set up for Portland. He's a difference maker for that team. You're right. He's leading what is a wagon. And it's not just not nothing. That's huge.
Yeah, I think, the biggest thing for me and probably for us was if Brandon's not going to bring in guys that he can play with, he has to leave that team. And our prayers were answered and we have seen the fruits of those labors. So, yeah, for Nate Danielson, I don't know how you would expect anything more. This is exactly how you would hope things would play out, maybe even more.
If the timing works out, he could be eligible to join Grand Rapids, as of this season, depending on where Grand Rapids is in their playoff run and how far Portland goes. But if they're going to be a wagon, you might be talking Memorial Cup berth, and then that's a whole different story. So let's look forward to next season. Based on his preseason performance for Detroit this past year, I honestly thought they could have picked him to make the team, and no one really could have questioned it. On a worse roster, and I think Steve Yzerman even said this, on a worse roster, he would have made it based on his performance. So the de facto thinking might be, okay, Nate Danielson, Grand Rapids Griffin next year. I'm sure the Griffins fans would love that, and he'd do great there. Waiver exempt, of course, so it makes it easy to move him up and down. But I think he challenges for Detroit. Roster jam be damned. I think he could make a lot of noise. Another strong preseason like the one he had, I don't really see how you keep him off this team.
It's almost unfair to expect a guy to jump straight from junior into the NHL. He's a top 10 pick, so it's not crazy. Guys do it all the time, but you always have to have that flag in the air of warning saying, more often than not, these guys won't do this. But I think the 2 exceptions here that almost make me think the expectation should be to be on the Red Wings is, well, one, like you mentioned, he almost made it last year. And two, don't forget, he's a late birthday in his draft year. So even though he was only drafted a year ago, he'll be almost 20 by the time, next season is underway, because this is his 4th year in the WHL. Combining those two things, I think there's a real good shot he's going to make this roster. The biggest hindrance to him making this team might be Mazur and Kasper. And not that he's better than them, but Mazur's older, Kasper's the same age, but they've already got a full year of pro experience under their belt. So I think they might go into camp with the attitude of Ty goes to the guy who's already been in the AHL for a year. And we don't know what they're going to do in free agency, trades, how many roster spots are going to be available. So by no means is this a given, but I don't hate his chances.
They need lots of flexibility when it comes to training camp this year. They can't have one roster spot for 3 or 4 guys who they think could make the team, because if 2 or 3 of them look really good, well, then you've got yourself in a bit of a bind, because like we've talked about before, you have to start graduating some of these guys out of Grand Rapids, out of the junior system, out of Europe, and into Detroit sooner rather than later. And I don't think having Danielson and Mazur, at the same time when seasons start to become important is a good idea.
Maybe not, and we saw, I know we're all thinking about when the season kind of went down the tank for a month there with Detroit, but by and large, for most of the season, we saw a strong forward group from Detroit. So I understand what you're saying, Evan, but from previous conversations we've looked at it, the cap is going to dictate needing cheap contracts. So is it the smartest thing? It's risky.
Well, I'm saying don't sign every UFA available and leave one potential open spot for a prospect.
Oh, yeah. And that's, I think really Yzerman's going to be forced to consider the prospects more than most of those guys. Trades might complicate things, incoming Brian Rust and all that, but the cap structure as it stands, Yzerman's going to need those cheap ELCs. He's going to need the entry-level dollars, which come in, obviously, that's the lowest you're ever going to play a player of that kind of talent, or period. And so it's going to work out for them because that's their only path forward. Brad, you mentioned something about Nate Danielson and his readiness. It's also worth saying it's never easy to jump from junior hockey to the NHL or even to the AHL. It's obviously a challenge. But of the 3 CHL leagues, the WHL is the most, I think, physically demanding in terms of playing against big bodies and understanding how hard the game is played. It's still not even close to being the same as the NHL, but if you're going to be prepared across any of those 3 leagues, like the WHL's, in my mind, in a completely different universe than, for example, the Q, in terms of what they face in that league in terms of physicality. So that's another point in his favor. I will say, I don't think it's like a failure if Nate Danielson comes in and has a bad camp, or Nate Danielson comes in and has a good camp, but because of a roster squeeze and Ty going to the more experienced player like Kasper or Mazur, that he then has to go to Grand Rapids. It's not bad at all. I want to say that the Red Wings wouldn't keep him down longer than they need to. We just watched Simon Edvinsson stay down longer than he needed to all season. And that, to me, I'm hoping that's an aberration. That's just like a defenseman thing. Because with the forwards, I do get the sense that they're more keen on getting those guys involved and in the mix. And you look at other teams around the league, like a lot of them are worse than Detroit was this year, obviously, so they had the latitude to do this, but they're bringing in their young players, those young picks, a lot sooner. Like the times are changing. The overcooking prospects in Grand Rapids or in the AHL with whatever team you're in, it's not really the de facto move in the NHL anymore. And I think it's still shifting more towards utilizing those young players because those contracts are efficient. Nate Danielson has the capacity to do it, and I think that's exciting because obviously his NHL readiness was part of why he was that was on the positive column when he was drafted, and I'm hoping that this year he kind of pushes that envelope. A guy who's a little bit more complicated, Axel Sandin Pellikka, who is also having himself a great time right now, won the SHL title with Skelleftea, had that sweet picture of him with the gold helmet that they were wearing and with the trophy celebrating. But Axel Sandin Pellikka has made quite a bit of noise across the hockey community this past year.
Yeah, the blazing start he had, all the goals, was challenging a lot of U19 and U20 scoring records in the SHL before he got injured. And he didn't have quite the flashy playoff that he had a regular season, but he was still a half a point per game on a championship team in one of the best leagues in the world as an undersized defenseman. That's remarkable. So it's a testament to how good he is. And I think it's even more of a testament to how he's probably closer than not to getting on the NHL roster. I'm not saying next year, so nobody take it as I think he's going to challenge for a spot next year. He's probably not even going to be in North America next year. But I don't think he's one of these undersized defensemen that's going to need 3-4 years of getting used to the physical game to be able to step into the NHL and be effective.
Already playing, over 20 minutes a night after coming back from injury with Skelleftea in the playoffs, like he's taken over in the roles that he's had as like the de facto, the go-to guy on defense. The talent level, I do agree with you, Brad. I think there's enough there where he's going to need time for sure. He's not going to be an immediate jump, but I think the talent's just going to be enough to kind of paper over a lot of the stuff he's going to have to learn once he gets to the NHL level. And that's not like atypical. That's not a weird path for a player to take or a bad plan. Most players need that time on defense because it's a complicated position to learn at the NHL level. It's complicated if you've not played it in North America for a long time at the pro level. And, the Moritz Seiders of the world, those guys are the weirdos. You don't typically get someone that NHL ready on defense. In my mind, that's a position that takes a lot of time to develop your understanding, your feel for it. And of course, there's always the, NHL ice is smaller, time and space is, much more sparse, and the physicality is amplified to the nth degree. But Sandin Pellikka's offensive ability is fantastic as a standalone thing, like isolated. And then you also look at what the holes are on Detroit, especially on the right side. The sooner they can get Sandin Pellikka in the mix, the better they are for it. Like, you want a guy who's productive on the right side and still has room to grow defensively, like Seider, Sandin Pellikka in a couple of years or however long. That'd be a great 1-2 punch down the right side.
Yeah, I think Axel Sandin Pellikka obviously will need, in my opinion, I think he needs a year in Grand Rapids. Simon Edvinsson notably had a tough time making that adjustment, and he had the frame to sort of overcome the physicality and the lack of space. I don't know if Axel Sandin Pellikka does have quite as much of a luxury in that regard. So, yeah, he might stay in Skelleftea this upcoming season. I would love to see him in Grand Rapids sooner rather than later.
And for context, Yzerman at his end of season presser, just as a reminder, said he expects him to stay in Sweden, but they hadn't actually had the conversation with him, but that seems to be the expectation. Things can change, you never know, but it looks like he's going to, continue to develop in Sweden. And remember, Detroit has a strong development contingent in Sweden. It's not just Hakan Andersson scouting. They also have, Nick Kronwall over there. They have Nick Lidstrom over there sometimes. They have a really good development group over there, and they've developed great players so far. Like, their oversight has turned into some really strong, not just prospects, but players for the Red Wings, very obviously. So it's not a bad thing for him to stay over there. I know people are eager to see him. I am too, but with his game, like, you need to kind of foster that in a responsible way, in my mind. I don't want to say it's more delicate than Danielson's, but Danielson, it's just a different kind of player and a different kind of path up to the NHL.
Kronwall and Lidstrom over there. Do you think we should start sending some of our North American defensemen over there for a year?
Send everyone to Sweden, man. Send us to Sweden. Winged Wheel Podcast goes to Sweden. That'd be great.
Grand Rapids can just play with 5 forwards. We'll figure it out.
No, not right now. No, they need the help right now as they get ready for game 2 over here. But Nate Danielson, Axel Sandin Pellikka, like, you're not going to call a draft class this early. It's still years too early to know how an entire class did or how your picks did. But so far, the most pessimistic thing you can say about the Red Wings picks in the first round is no red flags, no concerns. And the realistic thing you can say is things are going great so far. The development's fantastic, and we're already talking about one of them potentially making the team next year.
Well, we got to keep expectations reasonable that their first 3 picks in this draft, the realistic expectation is franchise center, franchise defenseman, and franchise goalie.
Yeah, well, co-franchise goalie.
What Dallas did with Ottinger, Heiskanen, and Robertson in one draft, we just did that. Why? It's the sequel.
It's the nice thing about the offseason. You're no longer tied down by like the reality of what's happening in games and players on the ice. We can just get back on our BS again. That's why it's so easy breezy over here.
Yeah, honestly.
Misinformation.
I would never.
You would never know. I mean, well, let's wait to validate your scoop. Okay, those are the two Red Wings prospects that we are keeping our eyes on. Congratulations to Axel Sandin Pellikka on his victory with Skelleftea, and we're all going to be keenly watching Nate Danielson continue to lead the Portland Winterhawks. Okay, we are going to take a quick break here to let you know that this episode of the Winged Wheel podcast is proudly brought to you by Labatt Blue Light. Created in 1983, this premium light Canadian Pilsner is a delicately balanced beer brewed with Cascade hops and a blend of malt. It's fresh, crisp, and brewed to the highest quality standards. There's a little bit of Canadian kindness in every sip of Labatt Blue Light. How did it get in there? They're Canadian. That's how. You can spread the love yourself by sharing a Labatt. And when you do share a Labatt, you're not just sharing a beer. You're sharing an experience that'll pair with anything from hockey to a hoedown. So next time you're watching a hockey with your buds, be sure to share a Labatt, because while you might not all root for the same team, although we on this podcast do hope you're rooting for the Red Wings, you can all enjoy a Labatt Blue Light. We honestly love going to games in Detroit and seeing Labatt being the beer that fans clamor for all over the arena. It's a reliable beer and great to have in your hand when celebrating a goal. So head to the link in the description of this episode or the one you see on your screen to find Labatt in stores near you today. You must be 21 or older, and as always, enjoy responsibly. Wildcard 1, Wildcard 2, and Metro Division 3rd seed. What do they all have in common?
They have a lot in common with Evan right now. And you. Lots of time.
Oh, they're golfing. They're golfing.
Lots of time on the course.
Knew it.
We're not clever, eh?
No.
Yeah. I'm surprised Tampa Bay was in that mix, but hey, a wild card team, which Detroit wasn't really in the race with at the end, but still a wild card team. They lose their series 4-1. The New York Islanders, Detroit was in the race with them until essentially game 82. After game 81, they were no longer a factor. They lost to the Carolina Hurricanes 4-1. The Washington Capitals, who made the playoffs over the Red Wings on a tiebreaker. I'm not going to sit here and complain about the tiebreaker. Like that is what it is. They had the same amount of points. They actually had fewer overall wins. They just had more regulation wins. They lose 4-0 in a sweep to the New York Rangers, where they may as well have not showed up.
Well, they didn't. They were there physically.
I was making jokes about that privately, but I'm like, I'm not going to go put that all over social media. It just feels like whiny content, blah, 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 because it's not, I don't know, the Red Wings didn't make it. That's that. They had a great effort at the end after having a really terrible collapse before. It was a lot of fun to watch, and you wish they would have made it, but in the end, they didn't. And I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, it should have been them. No, it shouldn't have been. But what I will say is it shouldn't have been any of them. You should have given New York a bye. You should have given Carolina a bye, because we all knew that was the easiest NHL series to pick, maybe in the last 10 years.
Contract the playoffs.
Shrink the game.
Shrink the game.
Shrink the game.
After what we saw at the golf course earlier.
Shrink the game.
Let's start with Tampa Bay before getting into the good stuff. I really like Florida as a team, and I picked them to go far again. And I thought they win. I picked them to win, I think, in 6 or 7. I wasn't expecting that kind of dominance over Tampa Bay.
Well, that series would have been a lot closer, but Tampa, you figure a team with white and blue jerseys would have been able to distinguish the white and blue parts of the ice.
Yeah, the goalie interference topics were a hot button issue for a couple of reasons. That was, you don't want to say it. Like, I still think Florida wins the series no matter what.
I agree. The one game that Tampa had 2 waved off, Florida won 6-1, so I can't exactly call those difference makers. But this is one of those ones where the discourse online, everybody was yelling at each other, but everybody was right. Were those calls soft? Absolutely, 1,000% they were soft. I would like the rules to allow those goals to stand. But the standard on goalie interference is really crystal clear. If you go into the blue unimpeded, if you look at the goalie funny, they're waving the goal off. If you go into the blue of your own volition and you touch the goalie at all and the puck goes in, it's a no goal. That has been the standard for a while now. I don't want that to be the standard, but that's the standard. So I get Tampa, and I was glad John Cooper issued a bit of a retraction today. Good on him. It takes a strong person to admit that, yeah, no, I screwed up. I was wrong. I was heated, yada, yada, yada. But he's right in that those goals should count under a different set of rules, and they should change the rules. As they are, it was fine.
It's also funny seeing like what's happening with Vancouver, Nashville, and what's being challenged and what's not over theirs. You can't draw a map and make sense of what kind of consistency or standard that it is on goalie interference right now.
You actually can. Blue paint of your own volition. Like, it's that simple. If a goalie comes out of the crease and there is contact, there is a whole lot of gray area in the rules.
Yeah, that's where I agree.
Yeah. If the goalie is fully in the crease and there is any contact where the player is not pushed in, it's waved off 100% of the time. Like, so again, if you have a problem with those goals being waved off, I'm actually with you, but you need to understand where to direct your anger, and that is towards how the rule is written, not the ref enforcing it.
Florida as a team, they look like they did it last year, and they know exactly what to do to make a run of it again, which is extremely impressive that they've been able to do that and translate it.
They are so good.
Yeah.
So good. I'm glad. Like, I hate that we watched them beat the Red Wings in Detroit, but I'm glad I got to watch Florida in person this year to really, truly understand just how fast and how they just suffocate their opposition.
Yeah.
They do not give you a moment to breathe. And Tampa, though they don't have the depth that they once did, they still are a good team.
Oh, yeah.
And yeah, most of the games were close, but it never felt like Tampa was in that series.
Even the game Tampa won, like, what did Florida do? They did what Tampa's been doing to teams for a long time. Like, Tampa's a talented team, but they are also so agitating and grating to play against. They're tough guys, and their best players will all cross-check you in the ribs, hack you after a whistle, grab you around the neck in a scrum for no reason when they're losing. They'll just get under your skin to try to take something away from the victory that you're about to get over them, and Florida delivered that right back. It's not new for Florida to be a ratty team, no pun intended, but they've really kind of weaponized their peskiness in a way they're a tough team to play against. And you're right for pointing out that Red Wings game, Brad. We watched that game and we said that's going to be unless something goes completely haywire for them or they have no goaltending in the playoffs or something, that's going to be a cup competitive team. And so far that's what they've showed. Good on them. Tampa Bay is not an easy first round matchup, and they, I don't want to say made it look easy, but they kind of made it look easy. Elsewhere in the Eastern Conference, Toronto, everyone was writing them off after 3-1, and I think they're trying to do me a favor, because I said I don't want them to lose, even though I think they still will. I want them to come back and make it 3-3, and I want them to be leading by 2 or 3 goals in the third period again in Game 7.
Well, I want them to win the next game because I, in our predictions, had them losing in 7 to Boston, which I don't want to jinx anything, but as of right now, I'm very close to going 8 for 8 with the way series are sitting, and I've never done that before. So Toronto, please don't screw this up and win the series for me. I need Boston to still prevail. But it's not a Toronto loss unless it's heartbreaking.
That's right. And really, Boston lost that game in my mind.
Could you imagine coming back from 3-1 to losing Game 7 overtime or something like that? It'd be devastating.
They do it annually.
I would cry from laughter.
Steve's not going to talk to us anymore.
That's not our fault.
Oh, I forgot about the podcast war they want to start.
I think I saw a stat that Boston has lost the last 5 games where they could eliminate their opposition from the playoffs.
Yeah,
that's not a good stat.
They've been very unclutch, and they looked like they were afraid to win in that game. Like, they did not look good at all. If you can't beat Toronto without Matthews, they're gonna be a little bit nervous heading into Game 6. And I think we'd all, like, no one wants the Bruins, like most fans of their rival teams in the East, no one wants to see the Leafs or the Bruins win. So the best you can hope for is that they all take as many chunks out of each other as possible, and you get an entertaining 7-game series. The Carolina Hurricanes win 4-1 over the New York Islanders. The Islanders got their first and only win in the playoffs in overtime, but all in all, that was Carolina's series.
That one never felt close. Even when Islanders were tied in games, it was almost shocking how quickly they blew some of those leads.
What was with them allowing consecutive goals within like under 10 seconds?
I kind of feel bad for him on those 2 ones because there were fluke bounces on both of them.
It's playoffs, baby.
Oh, man. I don't feel bad for any team that employs Patrick Waugh because I do hold grudges.
I actually thank them because it gives us more content to laugh at Patrick Waugh's failures.
Terrific point. So thank you. Thank you, Lou. But no, yeah, that series was never close. The Islanders, to their credit, battled their asses off. That was a team that lost, but while losing looked like they gave a shit.
Mm-hmm.
And they were going to the wall to try to win. And Carolina was just so much better, it didn't matter.
That's another team where you're like, that's going to be a tough second round series. Like Rangers, Hurricanes. I know we just talked about the Panthers being potentially cup competitors, but Rangers, Hurricanes, like that could be the Eastern Conference Finals, no problem.
It could be. Both have significant flaws, though, that may hamper them against a team like Florida. I don't trust the Rangers at 5-on-5, and I don't trust Carolina's goaltending.
No, Carolina's goaltending is, until you see it, you can't trust it for 4 rounds.
Yeah, even when it looks good, you always have that feeling of, for how long until one of these guys gets hurt or turns into a pumpkin? Because it always happens.
New York Rangers, 4-0 over the Washington Capitals. We said it at the top of the show, and I think you were exactly right, Evan. I mean it. The Red Wings would have been probably just as unsuccessful, but they would have been more fun. They would have been a more fun team to watch. We saw the Red Wings all year. Could they defend? Most of the time, no. Would they get goaltending? I don't know. What day of the week is it? But would the offense make it interesting? Would the late game heroics make it interesting? I think the Red Wings would have had more fun. And I will go so far as to say, and this, I am being a homer and I'm not being rational, and I do not care about your logical points that you're going to say to refute this. The LCA crowd and how the Red Wings played at home in front of them would have made a difference. They would have got 1 win. They at least would have got 1 win, and I believe that.
The bar is subterranean, and we are so confident that we're going to clear it.
I just don't know what a Washington fan would have in rebuttal. Like what would they say to argue against the Red Wings fans saying, I think our team would have put up a better fight? I think maybe they would say, well, then you should have made the playoffs.
And that's the ultimate response.
But man, if you're going to make the playoffs and then put up that kind of an effort, it wasn't just an outclassing. It was just like Washington didn't even look like they entertained the idea of being there.
No.
So I'm with you guys. Put the Red Wings in there. Not only does the NHL like it more because it's 2 original 6 teams going at it, the LCA gets at least 2 home games in the playoffs finally. Man, it would have been so much better for hockey as a whole.
Is this just petty because we're sad and we have nothing better to talk about with the Red Wings? And is any of it logical? All of those points are true. That's only making me double down. The Red Wings would have stole 2 games.
You do have to recognize the efforts of players like Alex Ovechkin, who, yeah, he was held to 0 goals, but he also had 0 assists. But if you think about it, he was also a -2 and over 4 games did only manage 5 shots in about 19 and a half minutes of ice time.
Torn motivator.
Credit to the Rangers. Like, if you're going to eliminate Alex Ovechkin from a series like that, then you're eliminating his team. Like, they'd never stood a chance. They never looked like a team that believed they could win a game there.
No, not at all.
Shrink the game. It's unsurprising, right? Like, take away the jokes about, the Red Wings would have done better. We all saw this stumble to the finish line where everyone was just trying to lose less than the others. Like, this was not a competitive playoff race at the end or, close to the end. No one was seizing it, and everyone could see this coming from a mile away. The top teams in the East are going to absolutely dunk on whoever makes it. And, frankly, the Washington Capitals did Detroit a favor.
Well, yeah, you got to think about it. Were the Red Wings consistent enough to have at least given a run in the playoffs? No. Did they play good down the stretch, especially towards the end, to maybe make you think they'd carry some momentum into the playoffs? Also, no. Did they have the talent, at least at the top of their lineup, to really, really push a couple games here? Definitely not. But the vibes. The vibes were there. The late game heroics were there.
I know you were doing a bit, but I do want to call out. I think Detroit pulled away from this slump in March enough to where they would have had a couple
But
good performances.
No, they did.
No. And then between Larkin, Raymond, Kane, I think they had top end talent enough to make some games interesting.
Interesting, sure. Because it's easy to get lost in the moments. The last 4 games of the year, which we triumph as like the great, this is why they got in, when they stole that point, when they came back against Pittsburgh and got it to overtime. They were getting smacked most of that game against a bad team. Toronto, well, they blew a 3-goal lead to get to overtime on that one, but they pulled it out in overtime. And then the Lucas Raymond tying goal and overtime goal and the David Perron tying goal. Well, they had 2 very close games with the Montreal Canadiens.
Look, man,
they made Montreal Canadiens look like a playoff team.
Yeah, the vibes were high. The actual performance outside of like 3 guys was not there.
Just Win does not care about your context.
That's why I'm saying they would have took 2. They would have vibed their way to 2 wins.
So the Red Wings had 3 players who would have made it interesting. Washington only had 1. It was their goalie who would have made it interesting, and he got lit up. So that's how I net out on this.
Hey, and look, big game James, would he have let in some atrocious goals? Absolutely. But would there have been periods where the New York Rangers would have thought, why can we not score on this guy?
Because it's actually Jimmy Howard behind that mask.
Look, man, remember that thing that you referenced last episode where I posted the old lineup for the Red Wings and who?
Yes.
The actual funny part about that is there's a really good argument to be made that Bernier Howard was a better goalie tandem because Jonathan Bernier.
What do you mean there's a good argument? There is no argument against it. Ryan and Reimer down the stretch was substantially worse than Bernier and Howard at their worst.
Bernier was so.
He might be. This is going to be like the dumbest statement because he was here for such a brief period.
I love when he does this.
One of the most underrated Red Wings of the last 25 years.
Yeah.
I don't think people appreciated how much he did with how little he was given.
He papered over a lot of how bad the Red Wings were.
His career, by and large, was terrible, except for his stint in Detroit for some reason. He was the opposite of every other goalie. That is great with other teams. We figure they'll do it for Detroit, come in, turn back into a pumpkin, leave, and are good again. I'm looking at you, Alex Nedeljkovic. Bernier was the opposite. He was garbage, and then he showed a little bit of a flash. The Red Wings went, yeah, maybe. He was great in front of one of the worst hockey teams in NHL history, and then he left, and that was more so due to injuries, but his career was basically over.
Underappreciated, man. He did so much for Detroit. If you can transplant, if you brought that Bernier to this year's Red Wings, they're competing for wildcard 1.
No, literally, yeah, and that's not even meant. You might have said that as a joke. I don't know. It's literal.
No, he was so good for Detroit. The amount of games that he stole. I also think like it's goaltending has gotten systematically worse in the NHL by design over the last most of this past decade. They made pads smaller. They're making offense a little bit more potent. And overall, it's probably better for the product to increase offense. That hurts my defenseman heart. I'm sure Evan feels the same. Brad is giddy about that. But in all seriousness, that's the NHL's goal. You want to increase offense. You want to minimize the 2-1 games, for example. You want to minimize the goalies with 930, 920 plus save percentages. So that's why if you look at save percentages in the NHL, they go down. And the best goalies are still going to be the best. But it creates a lot of disparity between the top and the bottom, and there are fewer of the middling guys who can save you all season. Alex Lyon, Alex Nedeljkovic, James Reimer for a game here or there. Those guys can show up for you and perform really well, but it's going to be really hard to find anyone who can do what Bernier did because I think just times have changed just in this little last stretch of 5-6 years.
He was consistent. He was good for his meltdown games, but they were pretty few and far between.
We miss you, Jonathan Bernier. Okay, let's jump over to the West as we wait for the series to finish in the East, which is Boston and Toronto. In the West, thank goodness Dallas made that a series because, Vegas, Dallas, those are 2 cup competitors, 2 incredibly talented teams. They're stacked. It's, the Dallas Stars versus the Evil Empire, Vegas Golden Knights and their whole LTIR thing. Everyone, has an opinion on that. But most importantly, I picked Dallas to win the cup in my bracket, and I just cannot be embarrassed in the first round like that.
I'm going to tell you what's going to happen because right now with, again, how every series is sitting, of the teams that have 3 or 4 wins, I'm 7 for 7. but I have Dallas winning the cup as well. So I'm going to go 7 for 8, but my cup winner is going to be the one that gets bounced.
That's brutal. But they've made a series of it. They tied it up after being down 2-0, and now those two teams are going to give us a good show here, hopefully down the stretch.
Have the road teams won both games?
Yes.
That's crazy.
Correct. Especially in Vegas's barn. Like, that's one of the toughest buildings in the league to win in.
They're playing tonight. So at the time of recording, it's about 6:15 p.m. Eastern on Wednesday. So they're playing tonight, as are the Kings and the Oilers. So you're probably going to be listening to this and thinking, no, there's still more information here. But good on Dallas. Yeah, you're not wrong. Like, that's a tough barn to win in, and it's hard to go down 2-0 against the defending Cup champs. It's hard with the whole context of the LTIR thing. That takes a lot of guts. And if you want to win a cup, you're in general going to have to overcome some adversity like that. I'm not ever going to root for a Jamie Benn-led team, but I'm just happy for good hockey between them. You never want to see good teams bounced early like this.
That few seconds between Stankoven, McNabb, and Jamie Benn was the most playoff hockey sequence I've ever seen in my life.
Oh my God, that was amazing. Like, McNabb lights up Stankoven. Jamie Benn miraculously lays a clean hit right on McNabb immediately afterwards.
And nothing was dirty. It was literally huge. Stankoven has the puck, laid out. McNabb gets the puck, turns, laid out.
If you know someone who you want to get into hockey and you want them to watch the game and appreciate the high octane, like right into my veins, this is the best sport on earthness of it, show them that clip.
This series in general, we all predicted this was going to be the best series of the first round, and they haven't disappointed.
Yeah. 2-2, going back to Dallas. We'll see how that one goes.
The only series in the first round to go 2-2. That's crazy.
It's a bit of a disappointing first round.
It has been. It will screw up my bracket, but nobody should care about anybody's bracket, including mine. But someone please come back from 3-1. Just make this interesting.
We're going to circle back to Vegas in a second here. Colorado. They made the Connor Hellebuck believers and myself and Evan look very stupid. They, after a little stumble, speed bagged, as you put it last episode, Winnipeg.
If you take out that first game, Winnipeg looked worse than Washington. What Colorado did to them, they were even less in that series than Washington was in their series. Oh my God. It's like, not a lot of people were talking about Colorado going into the playoffs because they have some injuries and they didn't win the division and they weren't the wagon they were 2 years ago when they won the cup. And they took that personally. And they took it all out on the poor Winnipeg Jets.
Does it feel like there are a lot more cup competitors or potential cup winners this year? Like, it doesn't feel like a runaway year for any specific team in terms of who's the favorite. The cup almost never shakes out that way. The playoffs have a way of bringing up some unique storylines. But if Dallas wants to go all the way, they got to go through Vegas and then probably
Dallas would have to go through Vegas and then Colorado
and then probably Edmonton or maybe Vancouver if Vancouver's still doing it.
Vancouver's been terrible in this first round. I'm shocked they're up 3-2.
They won a game with 12 shots on net.
Yeah.
And then if, Edmonton wants to do it, they're going to have to get through whoever wins out of Vancouver and Nashville. And then they're going to face whatever team comes out of Colorado, Dallas, and Vegas.
Edmonton might have the best path to the final
but the bottleneck is still tight.
It is, but they are getting their toughest opponent in the conference finals, who is going to have run through two of those three teams, and they might be wiped.
And that's assuming they get through the second round. And what I'm saying is not a novel concept. As the playoffs go on, the teams that are last are better. I know that sounds stupid, but genuinely, like, so many of these teams you could look at and say, yep, they could be a favorite to win the Stanley Cup. Yep, they could be a favorite to run through that path in the East or the West. Or yep, you can understand how they're going to beat this team and then that team. And it's great for entertainment, but so many of these teams have like really great rosters and a really great run right now to be able to do it.
It's adorable. Winnipeg thought they were in that category.
I thought they were too. I thought they'd win around over the mighty Colorado Avalanche. I didn't think it was likely. I had it in 7, and I was trying to pick some upsets, but
they're not going to win with that core.
Well, like we said last episode, they're going to have to keep it.
Okay, well, they're not winning with it because the finger pointing started once again between the coaching staff and the players. Did Rick Bowness try to make any adjustments whatsoever? No. So he should be fired into the sun. But man,
After the season he had with the Jets?
sun. Straight to sun.
Remember that correlation? Remember that correlation we've always talked about save percentage to how people view a coach?
Yeah.
Well, Winnipeg had the Vezina Trophy winner, so do with that information what you will.
I also feel bad for Hellebuck. He had the most shots against in the first round of any goalie.
He wasn't even... for a guy who got scored on that much, he wasn't as bad as you might think.
And it's one thing to give up that many shots to the Islanders. It's another thing to give it up to Nathan McKinnon and Cale Makar of the Colorado Avalanche.
They gave up 5+ goals every game, even in the one that they won.
Vancouver, Nashville.
That sounds like the Red Wings.
This, outside of one stretch towards the end of a game, we can all agree this has been the worst series in the first round, yeah?
Yeah.
I mean, other than their Vancouver's goaltending drama, yes, I would agree.
Yeah. Besser had that hat trick where he scored 2 goals with an empty net to tie the game, and then Vancouver won it in overtime. That 4-minute stretch from the end of the third period to the goal in overtime is about the only part of that series I've paid attention to.
It's a weird, grindy series. Like, there's not...
With Nashville, that's not surprising.
No. Nashville giving up that lead and letting Besser tie it and, score his hat trick, and they were, 8 seconds away from winning that game? That was tough to watch.
The missed empty net.
Oh, God.
There were guys on the bench celebrating, didn't realize they had missed.
Oh, my God.
They're all hugging each other.
Was it Quinn Hughes with that keep at the blue line?
Yep. As Nyquist blows a tire going by him.
That's rough.
That's like the start of the demons that the Maple Leafs have. You start having crazy scenarios like that come up. You're like, are we cursed?
And you look at that team and how out of it you thought they were when there was the whole U2 concert was canceled, and then
that's when they got good.
Yeah, they had that hot run, and I was like, oh my God, someone's gonna have to play Nashville, and they're not playing their best hockey right now. And frankly, they've played 3 different Vancouver goalies. You gotta win.
You gotta win.
Series isn't over though. LA, Edmonton. Edmonton's up 3-1. Time of recording. By the time you listen to this, it might be over. But man, if Edmonton and Skinner get into a groove here, and Skinner's able to, win 1-0 games for the Oilers, it doesn't matter what happens on the other side of that bracket.
That was the worst thing that could have happened to the Kings, letting Edmonton realize they can win a grinded out type of game. The early in the series, the Kings actually won a game that turned into a bit of a track meet, and that surprised everybody. And then Edmonton laid the gas down the next game and then won this game. Man, that's got to be pretty demoralizing for the Kings. I'm curious to see how they come out tonight. And the game tonight is in Edmonton. So I will give LA a ton of credit if they win this game, because everything is going against them going into it.
It's another team where you're like, they seem like they know they're going to lose in the first round. Winnipeg, they never got back in it. Washington, it was over before it even started. The Islanders really never had a chance, even though they were close. And Tampa Bay just immediately got run up on by Florida, so they were out of it before it even started too. Like, I'm not going to say it's not entertaining. The playoffs are always entertaining. I love the first round of the NHL playoffs because it's just action after action after action, multiple games each night. But these ones have, you miss the tightness that you would get in previous years.
I think this is the year, though, with what you were talking about, how many actual contenders there are, where the second and the third rounds are actually better than the first round, which is very rare.
Yeah.
But I think this is the year it's going to happen.
Yeah, this is the byproduct of that. Like, if you have all those teams that are cup competitive, then you have a bunch of teams who don't stand a chance against them.
And when you get a bunch of punching bags like Winnipeg and Washington and the Islanders in the first round, these teams aren't super beat up and gassed going into this second round. At least some of them. Sorry, Dallas and or Vegas.
Yeah.
It doesn't help that Edmonton and LA, the game on Sunday, started at 10:50 p.m. Eastern. I think this is an obvious statement, but I'm not staying up for that.
Whenever I see a mock-up of Detroit going back to the West, I want to fight the person who does it. I actually want to physically fight them.
Sometimes I feel like the Western Conference is just a completely different league because I have no idea sometimes what's going on because the game starts so late.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, the next morning I'm going to try and extract the important details out of these games. And Edmonton's look good, and Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl are two of the best, if not the best players in the world. And we've got a game starting at Sunday night at 10:50 p.m. Can't be happening.
If Connor McDavid played on the Eastern Seaboard and that's where he was drafted, the salary cap would be $5 million higher right now. I'm sorry to say it. Okay, let's do Vegas quickly here because it's been a storyline obviously for weeks now and we haven't really addressed it this season because it's been happening season after season. Vegas did it again. Mark Stone, he had that.
We didn't talk about this?
Well, not like in terms of what the league should do and is it breaking the rules? Is it cheating? Is it fair?
All right, let's get that out of the way. It's not cheating. It's not breaking the rules. The CBA is the CBA. This is the one argument I hate when people go, oh, Vegas is cheating. If they're allowed to do it, it's not cheating. I hate the rule. Don't get me wrong. I'm with everybody on this. This is insane to me that you can go into a playoff game 10, 12, $17 million over the cap, whatever Tampa did years ago and Vegas is doing this year. Chicago did way back when. It's stupid. It's asinine. You want parity in the NHL. You don't just get to have an arbitrary date where you go, that doesn't exist anymore. Now, I understand the point that was made years ago, and I think Ken Holland actually brought this up back around 2005 when the salary cap came in, saying, well, there's going to be injuries. You need extra bodies on the roster, and you can't dress 17 guys in a playoff game, which is a really, really good point because you don't want stuff like that in the playoffs. I feel like the answer here is really, really obvious and simple. And I'm sure there's probably someone out there much smarter than me who can correct me as to why this is a bad idea, but I have not seen a good argument against it yet. The 20 guys you ice in a playoff game have to be cap compliant. So if you have a ton of guys on LTIR and a Mark Stone situation because of legitimate injuries that Kelly McCrimmon inflicts upon his players, I understand that you're going to have to go well over the salary cap. And you're not going to trade that guy or send him to the minors when the playoffs start if that puts you over the salary cap. I understand that, and I'm A-okay with that. And I am a fan of teams being able to do what Vegas did where, well, we still need to make the playoffs or we still need to make a run for the division because whatever. So we lost this guy for the rest of the season. We would like to go trade for someone of his caliber if we can. I'm all for that. But when the playoffs come around, the salary cap is what is dressed for that game. So if you are so far over that you have to scratch Mark Stone one game and then Marchessault the next game and Noah Hannafin the next game to be cap compliant, so be it. That's the price you pay for going over and during the regular season and doing what you have to do to make the playoffs. But you can carry 40 guys on your roster for the playoffs if you want. And your total cap hit of who you're carrying is $120 million for all I care. But the actual guys playing have to be under the ceiling.
I think it's going to get addressed no matter what. And I agree with you that it's not cheating, that everyone has the opportunity to do this. And I also don't think like a lacerated spleen, the NHL is independent doctors. That's verifiable. The obvious, and for some reason people miss this point, the obvious thing that's happening is that guys are either ready sooner or they're in that window where you could play, it's a little uncomfortable, but you're not going to do that for game 82 when you clinch the playoffs, but you're sure going to do that for game 1 in the playoffs. Everybody's recovery in the NHL through the power of resilience and a lot of really strong medicine, they can come back sooner, even if it's not medically what the doctors would say, yeah, they are absolutely 100%, but they would still clear them. You're not going to do that for a meaningless regular season game, but you would do that for, once the playoffs get underway. And that's what's happening. Those timelines, the amount that they've been stretched, I think before there was scrutiny, I think Vegas and other teams stretched it a lot, Tampa Bay, but I think now that there's scrutiny, you can still, with some luck and when guys get hurt, you can still move it around a little bit. And what's the NHL going to do? Like, do a exploratory surgery to say his spleen is actually really good, and so we'll just close up this. No, it's obviously not going to work that way. So I think they're going to move towards a solution like what you said, Brad. Some kind of solution in that regard. There's not a lot of incentive for players or the teams because the teams are going to want to have that advantage, and the players are not going to want to mess with guys getting paid, or you don't want to restrict the amount of guys getting paid. But because of the amount of scrutiny and publicity and bad press around the competitiveness and the imbalance in competition, I think it's going to be too much for the league to overlook. And I think there's going to be want from the owner's side, the player's side, and frankly, Gary Bettman and Colin Campbell are going to say, like, broker, we're going to want to figure out something. I don't know if it's going to be drastic and they completely eliminate it, but they're probably going to make it so that they mitigate the impacts of it, or they make it a lot harder to do.
I think people are just upset because it's now happened to the same team, the same player, and multiple times, and it just feels like this continues to happen. So I don't blame people for being upset because it's just such a coincidence that it keeps happening over and over again. It doesn't seem to happen to the guys who are making league minimum. It's just wild to me. And then, wow, it's Christmas Day. We got our miracle. Mark Stone is back for game 1. I can't believe it. No contact jersey the day after the season ends. I can completely sympathize with people why they feel the way they do. It's stupid.
And there's also, like, players will play through injuries that there's certain injuries that are serious, but playing on them doesn't necessarily make them that much worse. Like certain tears or certain fractures, it hurts. It sucks a lot. They're getting a lot of, medical help to play through that, but they can play through that. But then what they might do is that they might time it so that at a certain point in the season, once the team looks safe, they say, all right, I'm going to rest now or have this procedure now. And you show the NHL, like, hey, look, that bone is broken or this ligament or what tendon is torn. He needs to take the time off. He was playing through it before, so it wasn't an injury registered before. There's so many ways to game this that unless you completely close the lane, it's going to get exploited. And the teams that are missing out are the teams that aren't exploiting it.
Yep.
I did, again, you don't root for Jamie Benn, but there would be a lot of satisfaction from across the league if Dallas did complete this comeback against Vegas. All right, let's jump into our prospect profile quickly here before jumping into overtime. This prospect profile is another really interesting one, and you're going to get shades of previous Russian top prospects in this one. But Ivan Demidov is a highly talented player out of St. Petersburg. The winger is going to attract quite a bit of attention. Where he goes is a little bit of a question, and there might even be a little bit of chaos, Brad, saying trade up for him. So who is Ivan Demidov as a prospect, and just how good is he?
His skating is okay. I wouldn't call it a weak point, but it's definitely not a strength. He's not a burner. He's not Connor McDavid, Cale Makar out there. And I would say in terms of question marks about what his limitations could be at the NHL level, it's that and that alone, because the rest of his toolkit, oh my God. Vision, skill, shot, whatever you want to quantify as talent, the guy is electric with the puck on his stick. He can make plays happen almost out of nothing. He understands how to move the puck around, where guys are going to be, how to read lanes. He is so fun to watch. You want to talk about a guy who you might get out of the top 3 that could actually be a game breaker for you? This might be the guy. On talent, he probably shouldn't get out of the top 3 in this draft, but we know how teams covet defense, and we know how teams do not covet Russian players these days. So he's got both those things going against him, which means someone down the board is probably getting a lot of value. And if he drops far enough to the range where it's affordable for the Red Wings to trade up, oh my God, do they have to try.
Yeah, if he's ranked as a top 3 talent, then it's going to be out of range. But if some folks have him down at 6, 7, 8, or even beyond because of the Russia factor, or they wonder about whether his size will allow his extremely high-end puck skills to translate that well to the NHL level, then yeah, in my mind, you take that risk and try to bring in a guy like that, because if you want to try to maximize the return on a pick and get a first overall, second overall pick talent in an 8th overall pick's close, that's a hell of a way to do it.
I pulled a stat when I was looking this up. He had the highest MHL draft year and draft -1 point per game ever. Guys who also played in that league: Nikita Kucherov, Artemi Panarin, and Kirill Kaprizov.
Not bad.
His is better than all theirs.
Not bad at all.
It is truly disturbing how talented he is. He doesn't play really a good defense, but man, we're here for the home runs. We're here for the dingers.
Yeah, Nikita Kucherov sucks defensively. Does anybody care?
No,
100% not. Now, should Red Wings fans spend a lot of time thinking about a possible trade up for him? No. The odds of that are so low. The odds of him falling far enough to the point it's even feasible are very low. And then the odds of a team accepting a trade down from Detroit to make it happen are even lower. So do not waste a lot of time on this pipe dream, but the chances are not zero. So it's worth talking about just because of the Russian factor and the defense heavy draft. Those are the two reasons why this is even a remote possibility.
Eventually, the Russia factor will go away. I'm not saying because the war in Ukraine will end or anything like that, but probably because leagues will say, yeah, we can't wait this out like we were hoping to, and so we also can't close off his talent pool forever, and we're going to go back to that well just the exact same way. We've seen it happen already in the CHL. They're not going to want to continue to hinder their operations. So teams aren't going to be scared of Russian picks. I mean, there could be some shenanigans going on here with Russia not letting their picks come over or continuing to restrict them in that way, and that's not new. But yeah, teams, these opportunities won't always come up. So I agree with you, Brad. It's very unlikely that this is even an opportunity. And if it's an opportunity for Detroit, then it's an opportunity for everyone else, really. But it would be a very, very cool and massive move to make. Really talented guy. Also, like Michkov to Demidov year over year, like back to back like that. It's kind of fun to see how much those two guys mirror each other in terms of their skill and their situations as well. Whoever ends up with Ivan Demidov is going to have one hell of a talent. I'm not going to say he's a guaranteed game breaker. Like if he was a guarantee, he'd be first overall, but looks really, really good. Okay. Why don't we actually move on beyond? We'll save the talk of the NHL awards and some other news, the coaching changes that have happened for next episode. And why don't we move on to overtime here? Overtime on this episode of the Winged Wheel Podcast is proudly brought to you by our Patreon supporters, patreon.com/Winged Wheel Podcast. You get access to benefits like the Discord, the bonus episodes, the giveaways, and lots more. You allow us to continue to record and produce this show during the off season as we completely embrace our BS. You allow us to support the Jamie Daniels Foundation and also produce other great content like Expected by Whom, hosted by Prashanth Iyer and Sean Shapiro. So again, patreon.com/Winged Wheel Podcast if you want to support the show. Question here from Matt Speed says, hey dudes, something that surfaces every so often, the Hockeytown Center Ice logo. Thoughts on bringing this back? Personally, only after the next cup as defending champs. Besides that, any other throwback changes you want at the LCA? Cough, red seats, please, cough, cough. Thanks as always for the best content out there.
Red seats, definitely. I like the aesthetic, just the pure aesthetic of the Red Wings logo by itself better. The Hockeytown logo I love for nostalgia reasons, and like it feels like the pure 90s bullshit that it is. And yeah, I don't think you're allowed to call yourself Hockeytown after missing the playoffs for almost a decade.
No, screw that. No.
We can reference it. We can talk about it. We are Hockeytown, but to like paint it on the ice and call it feels like it needs to be earned. You know what I mean?
I want one playoff run before I see it go back.
So the win a Stanley Cup, then throw it back on. I think I'm on board with that idea. I like that. But
I want to see it the first time they make game one of the playoffs, the first time they're back.
That would be sick. That'll be a nice hype up for it. Yeah.
Yeah. Can you imagine they have
if they paint Hockeytown on the ice for game one of their first home playoff game back and drop the octopus from the ceiling?
Oh,
we're so back.
You are
so back.
You are blowing the roof off that building. Caesar's going to end up on the moon.
You know what else they should bring back?
That's great advertising.
From Joe Louis Arena? The concession prices.
Oh, dude.
The troughs.
The troughs.
Yeah. What's the one team in professional sports? Is it the Atlanta Falcons that have their notoriously cheap concession prices? And everywhere else is ugh.
It's disgusting.
But yeah, the hype that you would get from Hockeytown and the octopus. I mean, I'm happy it didn't happen this year because that would suck if it happened and the Red Wings got swept. But hey, if they won just one game, then that would have been great.
Hockeytown logo for game one. Octopus coming down from the roof. I don't care if the Red Wings are playing the 1980s Oilers. It's going to be 3-0 before Edmonton realizes the puck is dropped.
The fans are going to score. The fans are going to get credited for secondary assists.
Yes, 100%.
As they should. Abu Dhabi Dues #2 fan says, how about Gustafsson from the Wild to share the net with Lyon? 2 years left at $3.75 million. Russo/Smith thought that perhaps the Wild could get a second. They'd probably prefer to get a rostered player back anyways, ideally a middle six winger. Then you could trade or buy out or whatever with Husso.
Don't love his cap hit. Don't love the idea of let's try another project goalie who has been kind of good and then sometimes not, just to see. That being said, if you can unload a contract, say Robbie Fabry
or Husso,
to bring back a similar level of contract, it's probably worth the gamble. He's not near the top of my list of guys that I would actively try to acquire this offseason, but if the other ones aren't panning out, I wouldn't hate it.
All right, moving on here. Matt says, when you guys spoke about Zeev Buium, you spoke highly of his hockey IQ. I'm wondering how you evaluate that in prospects. It seems like something that would take hours of viewing to perceive as being elite. Is this kind of consensus opinions of scouts on him who have done that already, or is it easier to spot than I'm thinking? So this is a question that comes up quite a bit, and it's a really good question that we're happy to keep talking about.
Some guys, it's incredibly obvious the first time you watch them because you just watch the way they manipulate time and space on the ice, the lanes they see, the way they work off what the defenders give them. Like, you have super talented players who can make stuff happen because they're so talented they can just make it happen. But you watch a guy like Nikita Kucherov, he's always my favorite example for this, where he just manipulates the defense. He takes all the time he needs. He finds that passing lane you didn't know was there. He can look off a goalie and rip a shot because the goalie was thinking pass and he caught the goalie leading and goes high short side. Most guys aren't that obvious, even if they have really good hockey IQ, but those are the things I tend to look at, like the time and space and how do they work with it. Can they play off what the defense gives them? Or are they just trying to force something, what they want to happen to happen? Can they see the lanes? Mm-hmm. And can they read the goalie?
There's some like old adages that really hold true is when they receive the puck, are they waiting for the puck somewhere? Or are they going to where the puck's going to be? How can they find that space, as Brad referenced? Where are they sending the puck? Do you see that as a viewer, as a play that was going to unfold? What do people say about Gretzky is like he could see an entire play unfold all the way up the ice and just no one else around him could do that. And his ability to kind of sense that, it's not like, I don't want to say it's not learned. Like, it can be learned to a degree, but there's obviously guys who can think the game in a way where you're like, they're just wired differently. They have to work hard at it. They have to practice it. Other guys can catch up based on hard work, but certain people are wired differently. And I joked about this on a previous episode. It might have been an overtime bonus episode, but if you grew up playing hockey, you will know this to be a fact. Off-ice intelligence and on-ice hockey IQ are not correlated. Some of the best defensive partners I've ever played with are some of the stupidest people. And I don't mean like bad person or what a jerk. I mean, like, genuinely, they could not.
Ooga booga.
Yeah, they must have had quite a bit of help tying their shoes every morning. But my God, could they read a play from the blue line? Unbelievable. So hockey's funny that way. It's just organized cavemen. Okay, moving on here. Jeremy Dahl says, Detroit screw up by not signing Kane for longer. Should we have just locked him up for 3 years when we signed him this year? We've talked about this before. There's just too much retconning about that for me to say that, yes, that's the case, because there was just a lot of risk. Even if you were a big believer in Kane, being able to come back from his hip procedures, could you have said it was going to happen to that degree, that confidently? I just don't think so. I think there were longer contracts based on my understanding, what I was hearing, that were considered by Yzerman, but ultimately they went with something shorter term just because that's what everyone felt the most comfortable with. In my mind, I don't think you can regret bringing Kane in on a 1-year deal. That was like, yeah, it's not massive risk if you bring him in longer because it wouldn't have been a 35+ contract, whatever, you can move cap around, but how could you have anticipated this, in my mind?
He was coming back from a surgery that nobody had ever successfully come back from. There was too much. Nobody in the world was offering him more than a 2-year deal at that point. Nobody.
I think there were some teams who were considering 3-year deals, and I think Detroit might have been one of them at some point, but in the end, it just didn't come to fruition. There's also been I've gotten a few questions and I've seen it posted is like, what's with being so dead set on Kane coming back? It's not the end of the world if he doesn't. And if you think a lot to especially what Brad has been mentioning recently of if Detroit takes a step, it doesn't necessarily have to be adding the best players possible now, as the youth movement drive it. And that might mean on ice performance results in a little bit worse results next season. That can exist without Patrick Kane, very obviously. And I want to call out that a lot of my wanting Kane back is like, I just don't want to see the success go away. It's selfish and it's not all logical. I don't think this team is better without Patrick Kane, but I will say I should probably acknowledge more. It's not the end of the world if they don't bring him back. They lose a lot of scoring. There's going to have to be a lot of offense answered if they have the same aspirations next year as they had this year, but it's absolutely not the end of the world. People are very right to point that out. Kevin Wolf says, I don't know if Winnipeg would even entertain the idea, but should the Wings consider taking a run at Cole Perfetti? He doesn't seem to have a fit on the Jets. He was playing fourth line minutes this season and only was dressed for one final playoff game. Due to time zones and early work, I don't watch many Jets games at all, but I remember really liking the prospect in the draft. Worth any of our assets, and what might be a fair offer if the Jets are willing to listen?
Moot point, they're not going to be willing to listen. The Perfetti issue there is purely a coach thing. There's even been reports coming out this week that maybe the organization stepped in to get him in the lineup for that last game because they saw where that series was going and they felt the experience might be better for him. And he had a good year. And given the age and the situation of the coach, I don't feel like the Perfetti issue is going to be an issue for all that much longer.
If they keep the coach, then that's a great signal that he might be available. Because I've heard rumblings and people suggest earlier in the year that he might be available. But yeah, if they made a deeper run without him, then I think we're having a different conversation. But let's see what happens with the coaching situation first. If he's still there, then maybe. And is he worth the assets? Yes, absolutely.
Oh, 100%.
If you can ever buy a promising young player who's just like hasn't landed yet in their career, but still is very obviously talented and has time.
Pun intended.
What did I miss?
Landed? Jets?
No. And I've missed some bad ones.
Come on, Ryan.
Some guy was messaging, you're going to appreciate this, Evan. Some guy was messaging me about buying golf clubs, and he was very happy that I agreed to it. And he's like, I appreciate the talking this out, man. It's been a slice. And Mel started laughing. I was like, what? She's like, it's been a slice. I'm like, I'm not funny or smart at all. I just miss all of this.
I can draw that up.
No, I got that one. Only took me a second.
That was the whole point of the entire thing I said.
You going into a conversation or a sentence with intention is a pretty unique.
It is, yeah.
People should.
I'm on my pick your own adventure every time I open my mouth.
It certainly is. You're Michael Scott. You don't know where you're going.
No, I don't.
Okay, we are going to wrap up this episode of the Winged Wheel Podcast. Thank you all so very much for tuning in. Thank you to Labatt Blue Light for sponsoring the Winged Wheel Podcast. And to all of you who are new listeners, welcome to the show. And if you're a listener of old, we really appreciate you hanging in and tuning in with us even in the off season. If you want to support us on Patreon, patreon.com/Winged Wheel Podcast. And if Patreon's not for you, but you want to support us in another way, leave us a rating wherever you get your podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, the thumbs up on YouTube, and hit that subscribe button wherever you are. It makes a difference. Tell a friend about the show. To all of our name level supporters on Patreon, we could not do this without you. Thank you so, so much. Arjun Shanker, Yves Bartels on behalf of the Sarah Grand Foundation, Aikfer, Samuel Soderholm, Icon, Victor Zetterberg, Brad's Lord and Savior Bradley Cleveland, Glenn Brabham, Croner's Left Knee, Ashley Van Conant, Sea Lion, Keenan O'Donohue, Yanni Burgers, Meals on Wheels, Matthew M. Rice, Admiral Matt S. at the Cheeseback Navy, Avery Sloppy Seconds, Beep, Brian Vasha, Carl Butina Nanaluski, Carl Provy, Citizen High Five, Clip Clop Nene, Connor Scovey, Craig Kibble, Denny's Gamer Girl, Derek Enstam, Cider, Dickens, formerly Marlon Winchester, DJ Denton, Give Blood Fight Probert, Hockeytown Matt, Jay Gollum, Jacob Turner, Joel Miranda, Jonathan Miller, Kaylin Wood, Marcus, Matt Keeler, Matt McKay, Michael Edlund, R.A., Ryan, 50, Hannah, Scott Martin, Skeletor, Scree and Lube, That's What I Appreciates About You, Utah Storm and Mormons, Wallman's Elite Dancing D, Iserplan Stan, General Andy Bohan of the Cheesebag Army, Sam Bankson, AB, Adam Rose, Axel Sandin Pellikka, Bellingham Acid Balls, Brad Simmons, Chi-Town Wings Fan, Chuck Buffchest, the Tarpless Goon, Commander Ben Barron of the Cheeseback Space Force, Connor Leighton, Corey Prida, Darren Fick, Datsuk's Dirty Deke, a brand new name level supporter. Welcome to the Dub Club. Derek James, Eric Nance, Evans Fourth Putt, Frank Stanley, Gene Sullivan, Griffey Boy, James Pridemore, Jeremiah Dobo, JM Rhapsody, Joey Jojo Shabadoo, John Evans Derogatory, John Ingles, Josh Yelton, Kevin McCracken, Known Petrie Truther the Mexanadian, Quaz, Les Grossman's Ungodly Firestorm, Linda Hall, Michigan Boy and Avs Country, Naruto's Punchable Face, Ophelia, Red Wing Tar Heel, Salt Lake Sugar Girly, Sean Mason, new name level supporter, Steven, the Hodag, the Stanley Cup is a Hyper Trophy, the Hat 123, Tom Iserplan Respecter, Throw the Road Puss, Toronto Maple Leafs, more like Toronto Maple Good Griefs. Ha 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 ha. Nice read. And Wings fan in St. Louis, Scott. Thank you all so very much. We'll talk to you Sunday.
Thanks for tuning in to the Winged Wheel Podcast. Be sure to check out wingedwheelpodcast.com, where you can subscribe to the show on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You'll also find links to other ways to support the show, such as Patreon, official podcast apparel, and more. And don't forget to follow the show on Twitter at Winged Wheel Pod. And of course, the hosts at Brad Crisco, at Ryan Hanna WWP, and at Hockey Town Evan.